Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the forum in the Kennedy School of Government, Institute of Politics. And I'm David Pryor. I'm director of the Institute of Politics, and we would like to extend all of you a personal welcome this evening for this very, very fine program. The Institute of Politics is concluding a very long, I would say, and exciting week in the forum. This week we have hosted a world leader from Asia, the nation's top media consultants. We have watched the debate on TV, and we have filmed right here on this stage for tomorrow night's performance, The Charlie Rose Show. Tonight we culminate with a talk entitled The War on Drugs, a report card. We're going to see how the war on drugs is working, or whether it is working. It is a difficult subject indeed, and it brings out very, very strong passions. Drugs have taken a terrible toll on this country and in our world, particularly among our nation's young people. Tonight we're joined by the nation's commander in the war against drugs, General Barry McCaffrey. He is a household word in our country today, and General McCaffrey serves as the director of the Office of the National Drug Control Policy in the White House in Washington. Joining us tonight also on stage is one of our own, General Terry Scott. I have never been around so many generals at one time. I'm surrounded. General Scott is an old friend of General McCaffrey's. He serves as the director of the Kennedy School in the National Security Program. Let me also introduce a former fellow Kennedyite, a graduate of the Kennedy School, Kirsten Todd, who is policy analyst for General McCaffrey. Please, she is back home now with her surroundings that she enjoyed here as a Kennedy School student. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce our very distinguished American, this very, very distinguished guest tonight is General Terry Scott. General Scott, thank you.
Thanks, David. Well, I've known tonight's speaker for about 30 years, so introducing him probably shouldn't be too challenging. The problem is he's done so many noteworthy things over the 40 years that he's been a public servant that it's pretty hard to pick out those that are most relevant for tonight's forum. In my opinion, Director McCaffrey mastered the art of leadership in both the military and political arenas during his public service as an Army officer. In addition to commanding tactical units from platoon level through the mighty 24th Mechanized Infantry Division in the Gulf War, Director McCaffrey served as the Director of Plans and Policy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as the Assistant to the Chairman for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In both of those positions, he was part of the administration's national security team, operating in both the domestic and international arenas. His last military job was as one of the regional commanders-in-chief. He led the U.S. Southern Command with responsibilities for Central and South American regions, as well as some of the countries in the surrounding waters in the Caribbean. I think that his understanding of the people and the countries of that region were of great benefit to him when he accepted his present job, that of Director, Office of National Drug Control Policy. For the last 5 years, he's worked tirelessly to address the complex international and domestic issues revolving around drugs and drug use. His talk tonight is entitled A Report Card. Well, here at the Kennedy School, we're a little wary of people who prepare and announce their own report cards, but I can assure you that having known Director McCaffrey for 30 years, his evaluation of his organization and his efforts will be a lot more rigorous than any external body would offer. As many of you know, Director McCaffrey has announced that he will resign his position as of January the 6th of 2001. Among those who will be sad to see him depart are the brave men and women at all levels who share his commitment to reducing drug use and to treating those who suffer from addiction. He has truly brought a unity to their efforts, and he has increased both funding and efficiency greatly. There may be some who are glad to see him depart. Some of them may be those who support the legalization of hard drugs, and maybe those who've been made uncomfortable by his straight talk about addiction and keeping your children off drugs. David mentioned that Barry is a household word, and one of the things that he has said repeatedly and clearly is that if you eat dinner with your children in the evenings, they're not likely to go on drugs. And he's also clearly stated that there is a chain that begins with smoking of cigarettes, goes through marijuana into hard drugs, that is an irrefutable chain and way that people go on drugs. And you know, there's a lot of people that don't like to hear that. However, Barry has said that before, and he's probably going to say it tonight. Now, a third group who might not be too sorry to see Director McCaffrey leave would be the revisionist historians who have attacked the Gulf War by denigrating the efforts of the brave men and women who fought in it. They'll probably be glad to see Director McCaffrey leave. When I was thinking about what to say, I said, gee, you know, I don't want this to sound like a eulogy for Director McCaffrey, and it certainly is not meant to be. I truly believe that all of us are going to see a lot more of Director McCaffrey and hear a lot more from and about him as he assumes his next life. He has told me he's going to write 3 books, and I believe he's going to start on them pretty quickly, and he will continue to be active in national and international affairs. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce and to welcome the Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy and a great friend, Barry McCaffrey.
Terry, thanks for the kind introduction and the friendship over the years and your own leadership, and I'm glad you're up here. And the many other people in the room that I've worked with over the years. Joe Nyan here, he's been a tremendous influence on a lot of us in the Department of Defense during his service and his writings. Graham Allison, who's worked with me, and we're trying to sort out the fragmenting former Soviet Union states and what are we supposed to do about all this. He brought a tremendous sense of enthusiasm and experience and intellectual rigor to our efforts when he was in DOD, and I thank him for that. Bill White for the invitation, and David, thanks very much for the invitation to be here, and I congratulate you on your appointment to be up here in the Institute of Politics. I've come here over the years, I don't know, 15, 20 times, and I've come and talked about arms control policy and how you negotiate a chemical warfare convention, and what do we do about trying to pull down the insanely high levels of nuclear weapons that we aggregated in the Warsaw Pact and NATO over the course of our 50-year confrontation. I've been up here to talk about Latin American policy and to talk about Mideast policy. And it's always been fun coming up trying to work on Russian generals and Chinese generals and how do we make them more aware of democratic institutions. By far, out of all the national issues I've been associated with, the drug issue has been the most complex, and indeed in some ways probably the most important that I've been privileged to be associated with. And I say that from the perspective of somebody who I am now ending 40 years since age 17 being involved in some way in public service as a soldier or civil servant. And looking back on it, this is clearly the most important contribution that I've made, in my view, was to listen to and help organize the hundreds of thousands of people that are trying to do something about the problem of drug abuse in America and the international community, and how do we rationally address it. A lot of them aren't here. Turns out, in my view, and I say this not just to stimulate discussion, I would argue the drug issue is not that complex. This is not a problem of that poses an intellectual dilemma like poverty or racism or dealing with an information-based society. How do you transform the United States into understanding the 21st century? These are not dilemmas we're facing. There are a lot of folks in the United States that actually have studied and understand this issue. The science of knowing about neurochemistry of the brain and the process of chronic addiction is well understood now just in the last 5 years, down at a molecular biology level. We have a good idea of where drugs are produced, how they're funded, how precursor chemicals flow, how they're smuggled. We know what happens when people take drugs. The National Institute of Drug Abuse, we have Dr. Alan Leshner is a national treasure, some 800 people. We fund 85% of the world's research on the drug abuse problem, over $600 million. You know, and we have these conversations sometimes, and some people say, oh, too bad we don't know about prevention models and protocols of drug treatment. I say, I hope we do. We gave Leshner almost $1 billion to look at the issues. A lot is known. And by the way, it turns out that most of us don't use drugs. United States, there's 270 million of us, and about a third of all adults have been exposed to an illegal drug at some time in their life. But if you look at last month, did you use an illegal drug? It turns out around 6% of us use an illegal drug. 14 million people. And a lot of problems flow out of that. Poly-drug abuse, pot and booze and other stuff. And if you use a lot of it when you're an adolescent, it turns out by the way, we don't have scientific causal linkage data that says if you smoke some pot at age 12, you're going to end up as a heroin addict at age 25. But we do have some enormous statistical inferences that suggest if you do a lot of gateway drug-taking behavior in your adolescent years, you come out of the 6th grade and you're drug-free, and you can articulate why you don't smoke cigarettes or drink beer or smoke pot. And by the way, a 6th grader can tell you that in today's America. They do not understand drugs for a variety of reasons. They see them, they encounter them. Then in the 8th grade, you and I are in a country where we've got more 8th graders using heroin than 12th graders. It's some sort of an anomaly. It's not many people. It's under 1%, generally speaking. We've got more 8th graders that are snorting heroin than 12th graders. And it turns out that of that 14 million people who used an illegal drug last month, a subset, a tiny percentage of the population, 5 million people, are chronically addicted to drugs, poly-drug abuse. We got reasonably good data on them, and by the way, they're easy to find. You literally could write down the names of those 5 million people by going to communities around America and assembling the emergency hospital room physicians and nursing staff, the people who work the welfare system for that city, county, and the people who are involved in law enforcement. The county judge, municipal judge, cops with 10 years experience. They know the names of every one of the 5.1 million people who we say are chronically addicted to illegal drugs. They're just in abject misery. It's unbelievable what it does to you. And by the way, although the center of mass of that population are in their 30s, it's a white male aged 30 or so, and I'm chronically addicted. 3.6 million of us, primary drug of abuse, cocaine, and another 940,000 may be chronically addicted to heroin, and there's some dynamic changes going on to all of this. New drugs are showing up, methamphetamines, ecstasy, PCP, Rohypnol, GHB, but basically the two huge chunks are chronic addiction to cocaine and heroin and other drugs. And they're just incredible what misery they're in. They're alienated from their families by and large. They're chronic offenders in the criminal justice system. They're in and out of county jails, 3 days locked up, 90 days. Some get arrested 100 or more times a year. They have felony arrests for a space of years. By the way, when you talk to them when they're in prison or in drug treatment, it's interesting to listen to their changed views. You start using drugs, sort of no-kidding reasons, because there's 12 chemical compounds that bring intense euphoria. That's why you drink alcohol. You use the Cadillac of drugs, heroin. If you got heroin, who needs friends? the Cadillac of drugs. And you use these drugs, they bring intense euphoria, they change and we understand that process. We can take pictures of your brain on drugs using PET scan technology. And by the way, here at Harvard University, over at Mass General, we're about to start another one of the neuroimaging centers. 5 of them we'll have around the country. The groundbreaking ceremonies taking place. You know, very sophisticated process. It's sort of indirect measurement of glucose metabolic changes in your brain function, but you can watch somebody who has been chronically addicted to cocaine and the brain function that it entails. You can detoxify them. You can take pictures over the space of a year. You can watch brain function gradually try and reassert normal neurochemical process, and then you can put that person who's in recovery in front of a video cue feedback of somebody taking drugs and watch that part of the brain light up with a compulsion. You have changed the way your brain function works. Happens quicker to some people, slower to others. By the way, some people apparently can use these drugs for considerable periods of time and not encounter dysfunctional behavior in a legal, medical, or social sense. So some people get away with it longer than others. Some people take lots of times, when I talk to these people in chronic treatment, they'll say, the first time I took crack, I said, thank God, this is it. I've finally found it. Or heroin. Both those drugs in particular bring that reaction to people. Thank God, now I knew this was it. But then the process of chronic addiction, sadly enough, results in a situation where you're no longer, once you've developed tolerance and dependence, you're no longer getting your euphoric feedback. Instead, you get up every morning and you go out, and your entire life's purpose is to find drugs to push away misery. It is unbelievable, and there is nothing you won't do. No manipulation, no criminal behavior, no loathsome personal sexual conduct that you won't do to get access to those drugs. And you know you're coming apart physically, morally, spiritually. You're paranoid. You can see that happening. You think people are peering through your keyhole watching you inject cocaine finally. And you know it's crazy, but you got to do it because there's a chemistry here that's pushing that behavior. Now, the other problem is it's not just change neurochemistry. It brings along patterns of other behavior. There's, social problems that come along with it, legal problems, and there's some other very difficult things to understand. How about a guy like me who's been in and out of hospitals for years? I probably spent, 2 years of my life in hospitals. Primary cause of diagnosis, gunshot wound, but other problems, malnutrition or malaria, and then you get a program, and it includes extensive exposure in some cases to opiate-based painkillers, but people like me statistically almost never go back out on the streets to find heroin. So there's another dimension to it, protective and risk factors on how you develop compulsive chronic drug abuse. Well, we're learning a lot more. What we did was, we've got a national law. It tells us to create a long-term drug strategy. You ought to know about this document. It's not a breakthrough in Western intellectual thought. If you look at it, you'll find it's sort of common sense. There's 5 goals, there's 31 objectives. We consulted some 4,000 institutions and people to write this document. It's in its 5th iteration now. We're trying to keep it relevant, coherent, and long-term. And one of the things you got to do is know about that, and it's on the web along with our other sites. We tried to create a 5-year drug budget. Each year we go down to Congress and say, here's a long-term approach to the problem. It's in a very good document. It's about a C- right now, but it's moving in the right direction. You got to have a debate on complex issues that doesn't deal with this fiscal year's budget. You can't run 3M or IBM or the national security process unless you get your horizons out farther. So we need a debate on drug policy tied to budgets, but where you can see the trade-offs between prevention, treatment, interdiction. You can only do that when you're when you're debating out years of a 5-year process, but that's starting to work. We said you can't have rational policy unless you can measure not just the input factors, meaning budget, people, programs, but output factors. What is it you claim you're trying to do in drug policy? And so we devised 12 target outcomes. We said, here's where we're going to try and be by 2007. We put empirical descriptions on them. We then identified 86 intervening variables. We said, if you want to get to these 12 outcomes, here are the variables you have to influence. Now we're trying to build a database so we can measure what we claim we're trying to do with this funding levels. And that's proceeding in the right direction. It's one of the more creative things going on in government. And finally, we said, you cannot have a rational drug policy unless it's based on science, not ideology. We put a lot of money into scientific research. It's gone up some by essentially a third in the last 5 years. We're now, the NIH does a superb job. The institutes, the National Institute of Health, Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control, Surgeon General's Office, ONDCP, but there's other pieces to that counter-drug strategy, and you have to have some coherence and some sense of priorities in your research effort. And I think this will start paying off in coming years fairly dramatically. I'm not sure I'm going to give you a report card. I think the American people ought to do that. We put out a press release and we said, here are the things we've done that we think are starting to pay fruit, and some of them are unarguable. You know, when we started this process, one of the no-brainer problems is the chronic offender in the criminal justice system and the compulsive drug user. They're overlapped. We got 1.8 million people behind bars. Think of that. That's much larger than the armed forces of the United States. And contrary to what is frequently put in the media, it's a rarity that people are arrested and put in prison for simple possession of drugs because of chronic addiction. The overwhelming majority, however, of people behind bars, I would suggest a huge percentage, like 85% of a chronic alcohol and drug abuse problem. The charge sheet may have read burglary, breaking into cars, fraud, but the actual problem is chronic drug and alcohol abuse. Until you create a rational drug treatment policy that's linked to the criminal justice system, you can't get at the problem. You release 500,000 of us a year, we go right back to chronic drug abuse within 72 hours. We have a failed social policy. We have to build institutions, infrastructure to provide effective treatment. The front end is easier than the back end. The front end says drug courts. There were a dozen of them 5 years ago. Now there's over 700 online or coming online this year. We're moving in the right direction, but that's still only a couple of 100,000 people in that drug court system. That's a huge savings, Madam Taxpayer. If you put me in the drug court system, it'd be somewhere between, a couple of thousand, $8,000 a year. Cost you $25,000 a year to lock me up. You got to create drug-free prison environments and start treatment behind bars, and that means primarily county jails and municipal lockups. There's 600,000 of us tonight locked up at local county level. And we got to organize a system to create that drug-free environment and that treatment environment. And finally, the hardest thing is when you send me back to the community, you have got to get me in drug treatment programs. You got to fund it. You got to make sure the probation parole system monitors me with drug testing. You got to make me go to NAAA and show me the sign-in sheet. I got to stay in this treatment protocol for 5 years because that's the half-life survival rate of drug addiction. And if you do all of that, you'll save yourself enormous trouble in America. Now, the easiest things you can do, though, is prevention. You got to get young kids and try and institute community-level policy that creates strong families, strong schools, good sports programs, parents who eat supper with their kids, who are involved in religious activities with their children. You got to have the pediatrician, the medical community has to speak to the parents and the adolescent about drugs in a medical context. If you do all these things, a lot less of us use drugs heavily early on during adolescent development. And it pays off. So we had huge resource increases in the federal government, 52% in the last 5 years in prevention education programs. huge resources increase in treatment. Some very creative programs. We're out there with a media campaign that's essentially talking to American adolescents last week, 95% of the target population, 7.8 times. We gave you a science-based anti-drug message. And by the way, we did it in 11 languages. And we did it with 102 different market strategies around the country. And we did it not through television, radio, but also internet, billboards, school-based systems. If you're a Chinese 40-year-old mother in San Francisco, you'll hear our material on nighttime Chinese language radio. And you can go up on a web page and get anti-drug based information in Chinese. You can hear an ad in Spanish, call a 1-800 number and get a booklet, how do you deal with your adolescence, and talk about marijuana use in Spanish. It will pay off over time. We're also trying to use that approach to channel energy into community coalitions, because America doesn't work from the top down, it works from the bottom up. So we've funded in the last 3 years, we're in year 3, some 400 community anti-drug coalitions, sort of modest amounts of money, $100,000 or less, and we give them 3 to 5 years of support, and then they're on their own. Those are some of the things we're doing. Adolescent drug use is down dramatically. It had doubled between about 90 and 95. It tripled among 8th graders. We now got it to level out and start going down. It went down 21% in the last 2 years, adolescent drug use. Pick a study, they're all clustering together, attitudes are changing, it's starting to bite in. We're creating new drug treatment infrastructure, we're trying to link that to the criminal justice system. We still got some huge problems. We've created an international cooperative effort. We've gone from on our hemisphere from 34 democracies in sort of binational confrontations to creating an OAS-based system of multinational cooperation. Second Summit of the Americas in Santiago, Chile, gave us our instructions. We signed it last October in Montevideo, Uruguay. In April 2001 in Quebec, we'll have the 3rd Summit of the Americas, and we owe a report to the heads of government of the democracies at that time. And how are you guys doing on creating this cooperative venue to deal with this problem? What about things we haven't done? We got more rhetoric than results in linking treatment and criminal justice. We still have some goofy, non-rational drug policy, non-rational criminal justice policy, not of locking up people for simple possession, but of minimum mandatory sentencing, of moving judicial power out of the judge into the prosecutor or indeed into the investigating officer. It doesn't change young people's behavior to threaten them with 7-year sentence vis-a-vis 3 years. It simply doesn't work, and it costs us as taxpayers a lot of money. We got to change our sentencing commission guidelines. At state level, which is where most criminal justice is, it's not at federal level. You know, all the crack versus powder cocaine furor, there's 120,000 people in the federal prison system. There's 1.8 million people behind bars. Criminal justice policy is a state and local function, and that's where we have to have this both sentencing guidelines and treatment sorted out. One of the biggest failures we have, although we've made some modest improvements, is many of you, most of you, hopefully, have a health insurance plan you're covered by. With Harvard University, I've got a Blue Cross Blue Shield card in my pocket, and it's got great coverage. I'm a federal employee, and until 1 October, however, it did not apply any significant help at all for mental health problems or substance abuse treatment. We cannot have a sensible drug policy in America until you recognize that one of the principal health challenges, if you're an emergency room physician, you are watching as many as half your patients who walk through the door of a chronic alcohol, number one, or drug abuse problem. You've got to provide treatment if you'd like to save some money. So we've gotten the president by executive order to direct that federal employees and their families, 9 million people, are now covered, where we say parity for mental health substance abuse treatment. We're about to have the Secretary of Defense announce the same thing, to bring family members of DOD employees under the same coverage. We got a bill in Congress, a Ramstad-Wellstone bill. It's got bipartisan support in both houses. It's got to pass. We got to change the rules of the game and make sure effective drug treatment based on NIDA published protocols, which have more effectiveness documented through peer group studies than does currently available cancer treatment. So we got to recognize that that has to come under health insurance. Otherwise, you got to pay for me when I'm HIV positive. You got to pay to put me behind bars. You got to pay for my hepatitis C, tuberculosis, etc. And these are certainly two of the areas that I think are going to require continued focus by the next administration. On that note, why don't I just stop? Thank you for the chance to share these ideas with you, and I'd be glad to listen to your own ideas or respond to your own questions. Thanks very much.
Let me very briefly review the Kennedy School rules. There are 4 microphones, 2 down and 2 up. We'll recognize, we'll circulate around and recognize people with each microphone. Also remind you that questions are short. They end with a question and not a speech, and we allow 1 per customer. So who would like to be first?
Okay. Hi, my name is Tal Clement. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. General McCaffrey, although you supported reducing the sentence disparity between crack and powder cocaine because of the racially discriminatory effect of this law, I've read several reports that suggest that given the similar rates of drug use amongst whites, blacks, and people of other races, law enforcement targeting of minority communities because of the public nature of these drug markets can explain much of the remaining disparity in our prison population. Is it morally right that white middle-class drug users, many people that I know, can continue to use and deal drugs in the privacy of their homes with impunity while our prisons continue to be filled with poor minority youth guilty of the same conduct or crimes?
Well, let me sort of accentuate the perception of the problem. Listen to some numbers. These are more or less right. They're a couple years old, probably. Many of us have a stereotypical position, for example, that drug abuse is primarily a minority problem. It's poor people, crazy people, city people, East Coast people, West, but surely not my kind of people, whoever that is. You know, you start looking at who's using drugs in America and what the consequences are, put it on a bell-shaped curve, go to extremely low rates of drug abuse, all right? The lowest rate of drug abuse in American society are active members of the armed forces. It's probably 1-2% positive right now. And those are the same boys and girls who are out there in the streets of Cambridge, but when they're in the armed forces, they don't use drugs. And that's tied to discipline, drug testing, et cetera, but mostly it's because we got sergeants and petty officers who set standards and act like parents and say, our culture in this squadron ship battalion is we don't use drugs. Very low rates, nearly a drug-free institution. And by the way, you tend to see the same thing, tend to see it in the Fortune 500 companies. You tend to see it among people in extremely difficult intellectual work, writing lines of code. I remember talking to somebody out in Boise, Idaho, running a very high-tech business, and he was telling me why they didn't need to do drug testing. He said, are you crazy? This business is so cutthroat, you can't stay in it unless all your intellectual energy is focused. So there's low rates. Let me tell you that almost the same low rate of general drug abuse, think young people. I'm 57, 30 and under is young people to me, all right? If you fix that in your mind. But one of the lowest rates in American society are African Americans who use less cigarettes, alcohol, heroin, crack cocaine rates for the black population 30 and under are lower than for the general population. Now, how about very high rates of drug abuse? Health professionals, anesthesiologists, ICU nurses. Though if you go to Talbot Marsh Clinic in Atlanta, sit there in a room, 25 docs, 45-year-old female plastic surgeon, San Francisco, chronically addicted to Percocet, Percodan, alcohol, now occasionally using cocaine. By the way, there's a big difference in America when you're chronically abusing drugs. Its impact on your life and the timing of your disintegration. Eventually, by the way, the drugs will bring you down. But if you're a dentist, it'll take 10 years, 15 years. If you're 16, it'll be a matter of months. That's the drug abuse in America problem, you know, is one that affects all Americans. As a matter of fact, it affects people who aren't very bright less than people who are risk-taking and middle class. It affects blacks, young blacks, less than young whites. So you got to see this, that essentially it isn't a racially dominated problem. Okay, now back to your question. If 12% of the population is African American, if 14% of the drug users are African American, there's a disproportionate number over the age of 30, primarily because of the cocaine epidemic of the 80s. 12%, 14%, 33% of drug-related arrests are black. 48% of those behind bars for drug-related offenses are black. 88% of those behind bars for crack cocaine-related offenses are black. We got a huge perception of institutional racism in the criminal justice system. There's some other problems that go along with that. Part of the problem is that if you look at who's selling drugs in America at a retail level, there's 3 levels of who's selling drugs. The international crime is not Americans. We've been driven out of the business. We can't compete. It's Colombians, Mexicans, Dominicans, Russians, Nigerians. That's who's dominating international drug sales and movements. When you look at the United States, the national level crime is dominated by foreigners. When you look within a county or a city, whoever owns gangs and guns owns the drugs. That's that's what the criminal justice system focuses on. We also do the vertically integrated crime structure, but that's if you're arresting people on a street corner in a joint task force, counter-drug task force in LA at 2 o'clock in the morning, the chances are you'll pick up 9 Honduran boys, 9 young African Americans. In this city, some places, the Irish are still proudly controlling local crime. That's who you'll arrest. That's where you get a lot of these disproportionate sentences. I think the other problem is that if you've got money, a health insurance policy, a family, a church, a supportive employer, you won't be selling drugs. That's why adolescents get arrested more than 30-year-olds. I sit in the Hazleton Institute. By the way, if my youngster had a drug problem, he'd be in the Hazleton Institute, Betty Ford Center, but it might be $20,000 a month for the program. You look around a circle of these young white faces at the Hazleton Institute, and a sophomore in high school with a $3,500 a week drug habit, polydrug abuse. Where do you get that kind of money when you're a sophomore in high school? You're from a wealthy family. Where do you get that kind of money? What do you think? Nope, you got to sell drugs. The only way you can make that kind of bucks in America is sell drugs. That's what happens. So if your 16-year-old daughter bought drugs yesterday here in Cambridge, she bought it from somebody in her own school system from her own race. The person who went and bought it in an open-air street market, by the way, if you sit there and observe who cruises through the open-air street market, I can assure you it's all races, all ages. In fact, it's sort of heavily weighted in favor of the chronic drug abuser. But that's where the arrest thing gets off track. We got to do something about it. But the thing you got to do about it is primarily you got to have effective drug treatment programs targeted on the chronically addicted. Publicly funded. We got to get more publicly funded programs. Thanks for that comment. Yes, sir. What?
Yes, sir. Thanks for being here tonight. I have a question I'd like to hear your comments on. Just last week, there was an article in the New York Times detailing how Major League Baseball players are using steroids at an undocumented rate because they're not tested. And this became popular during Mark McGwire's use of androstenedione, which is a legal substance then. I'm wondering.
Still is.
For baseball, correct?
Still legal. Go buy it in a safe.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there a federal role in regulating the use of steroids for athletes? Because it seems in Olympics they are tested, and we have found that they're using it quite a bit. And I imagine if they do find it in baseball, it might affect young people as well who are looking up to these players and might end up using it down the road.
How about joining us on an intern program next summer? We'll put you to work on it. It's a huge problem. And I'm serious. I had an intern working on it last summer, joining the 3 people we're addressing. Here's the reason you and I got to care about it. There's 56 million American children. Listen to this number. And, 10 years ago, if you were an elite athlete in America, if you were a second-tier elite athlete, they started using doping to compete and win. And it got to the point at which, if you're a first-tier elite athlete and you don't dope, you're nearly sure you cannot compete and win. And so it's an incredible problem that got out of control, and we've seen it coming since the 80s. It has devastating impact on people's physical development. If you talk to a bunch of teenagers, boys and girls, 12 to 18, if you're a young male using steroids, you're going to look good. And by the way, women, look good using steroids. You'll start getting that slightly ripped look. It's just great. Unfortunately, there's some spin-offs. You're doing liver damage. You're doing brain damage. You're going to atrophy your testes. You're going to, as a male, your breasts are going to start developing. You're going to get acne. You're going to go into steroid-induced rage phenomena and start pounding on your spouse, your girlfriend, whatever. And oh, by the way, at some point, it'll be irreversible damage. You can't go back there again. You have permanently marred your gender identity. And we watched this in the East Germans with 10,000 some odd young girls who were permanently ruined by steroids. And by the way, it isn't the athlete only involved in this. It's a team doctor, the trainer, the coach, mom and dad watching for a leg up on high school diving and Little League baseball. And then they watch Mark McGuire form the record. He was not violating a rule of baseball. He was not violating a federal or state law. He was taking a legal product. We've had this goofy food supplement mumbo-jumbo alternative medicine grow up in safe ways while parallel programs, FDA, NIH, clinical trials, safe and effective medicine, but they're bypassing it. You take andro in this end legally and excrete an illegal product. It clearly is developing artificial testosterone, developing muscle mass. It works. It's a problem. And what we need is consistent laws. What is a violation of doping rules? How do you test for it? How do you ensure you protect the rights of the athletes? But basically, what the elite athletes are telling us, you people owe us a level playing field where we don't feel we have to compete year after year and lose because we're not involved in doping. We have made some progress. We went and confronted the International Olympic Committee, quite an operation, I can tell you. And we said we demand a worldwide anti-doping agency. We want independent testing. We want transparency, minutes. We want the funding separated from the IOC. We want it moved out of Lausanne. We want accountable leadership. We started to move. Sydney Olympics were the first of a new era. A couple thousand out-of-cycle tests. We still don't have a test that's approved for human growth hormone, for insulin factors, for blood doping, but we're moving in the right direction. We've started a U.S. anti-doping agency. Frank Shorter, American hero, gold medalist in the marathon, is the chairman of the U.S. anti-doping agency. It's up and running today, just beginning. I'll bet it'll take us 2 to 5 years to get that going. Initially, it'll be Olympic athletes. I'll bet we get the NCAA involved in it. We'll get any professional athlete who is going to say he or she's going to compete in the Olympics. And then we're also working the U.S. professional athletes saying, look, this is a drug-free workplace. You people are highly paid employees. You're violating the law. We demand a change in the rules of the game. But it's going to be a long time coming. We're moving in the right direction. Thanks for that question.
Young lady up here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Siggins. I'm also a student here at the Kennedy School. And I just wanted to follow up on the first question that was asked. I appreciate your comments about needing to relook at the way we do our arrest strategies and make treatment more accessible. But I was noticing in the budget, in your annual report, that just reading through the numbers, you know, there's $100 million allocated for treatment. There's some other money under
No, there's
$200 million.
$3.78 billion allocated for treatment. $3.78 billion. It's increased by 35%.
These are the major increases. This is page
And you're
95.
probably looking at one of the drug treatment funding programs. There's $1 billion in Veterans Administration. Most of it's in HHS. There's $3.78 billion in our drug treatment program.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe I'm misreading
Changes
this.
the nature, you are, right.
Okay.
It just changes the nature. We should never argue about numbers, but go ahead and make your point.
Well, my question is, the way this report reads, there's less than $200 million mentioned for major increases in fiscal year 2001 that are related to drug treatment, and then the new prison construction is at $420 million. So there does seem to be a resource allocation issue.
Yeah, well, look, the larger question is a concern. Your numbers are off, but your concern is valid. And the concern says comparative payoff of various drug strategies. That's really what you're saying. Isn't there a bigger payoff from investing, first of all, in prevention? If you can get me to age 19 reasonably drug-free and I don't become a chronic addict, I just saved you $2 million, because that's the expected lifetime cost, the damages I'll do to you as society. So you got to get investment into prevention. Then you say, but some people are going to get addicted. You got to rationally organize treatment and link it to other systems. It's not enough to have parallel criminal justice and drug treatment. They have to be linked. And that's happening. But that's, by the way, much harder than organizing prevention programs. That 5 million chronic addicts are very unlovable people. They have no political base. The health professions don't like dealing with them. So it's a hard argument, but it is happening. And then finally, until you solve the problem of chronic alcohol and drug use, you're going to have to protect your society. Here's another set of numbers that are useful for a perspective. If I'm one of the 5 million chronic addicts, take Baltimore, I'm a heroin addict. If you ignore me, I'll do you $48,000 a year damage. I'm a one-person disaster to my community, and you're going to pay for me one way or the other. If you lock me up, depends on the state, it'll be, let's say, $25,000. It's sensible to lock me up. And by the way, you're angry at me because I broke into your house and took your CD player and whatever. It's appropriate to do something about it. The problem is you can't lock me up very long, so you'd better do something about my chronic abuse problem while you got me behind bars. That's the nut of the problem. You got to organize those capabilities. And for a lot of people, yesterday I had Department of Labor, HHS, the Therapeutic Communities of America, and we're talking about an industry. If you got 5 million chronic addicts, this is a huge industry trying to deal with them. But we got a workfare problem. I got to recruit bright people out of the University of Maryland or Indiana to go into drug treatment as an occupation. You got to work with people that might scare you, since you were raised in a middle-class family and went to University of Indiana. We got to certify you, and by the way, the places we'll have you work right now aren't very attractive. So we got a work problem to create that infrastructure. Final one, and we talked, I had to engage some of the gurus of Harvard faculty on the same question, because I think it's a legitimate concern. The other problem, I tell you, though, is somebody who taught American government for 3 years and then studied under the master Colin Powell, and now I'm immersed in the American government. Our government doesn't have fungible money. If you want money for drug treatment, please don't talk to me about the AWACS flying hour program in Bolivia. Those dollars ain't ever there as an opportunity to wash into prevention programs in San Francisco. are treatment dollars in Washington, D.C. That isn't the way our government works. You got to have a good idea, write it on paper, get the executive branch agencies to endorse the idea, get your committee of Congress, your subcommittee, appropriations authorization to support your good thinking. And oh, by the way, when you talk about drug treatment or criminal justice policy, you're talking to the wrong guy. Go see your state legislature. That's where this problem is fundamentally centered. It's not in the federal government. I'm doing pretty good. My report card, I've gotten tons of bipartisan supported money out of Congress. But the problem's in the county and the municipality, and that's state law. Thanks. You're right on a serious concern.
How about up here?
You said that you wanted to hear our ideas, so I'll take you at your word. You sort of touched on it just now, but I think the $1.6 billion in aid to Colombia, for example, were perhaps ill-considered, given the fact that there's considerable evidence linking these military donations to increased human rights violations and fomenting of war, paramilitaries, things like that. Could you please comment on that?
Well, you know, it's a huge challenge. It's a dilemma. There's some risky years ahead. There are probably some Latin American students in the audience here who will have their own views. It's fun to listen when there's a Colombian student here address this kind of an issue. You know, I used to put on my straw hat and say I didn't know, I wasn't a Latin American expert, but it's so easy to pretend to be one that, forgive me if I talk as if I'm a Latin American expert. I've been working that arena since I was 25. Certainly for the last 7 or 8 years, on a day-to-day basis, I've been from the end of Patagonia to the U.S.-Mexican border. I know all the leaders in the country. I watch the intelligence systems. We think, generally speaking, the larger issue is work it as a multinational problem. And so we did create the MEM, Multinational Evaluation Mechanism, under OAS, under the CCAD committee. We are going to present it to the Third Summit of the Americas in Quebec. We do have a council of experts. We have created a U.S.-Mexico binational drug strategy. We do have a demand component to it. We are sharing Spanish language prevention programs. We are sharing epidemiological studies. We are doing a lot to be cooperative in the international arena. And by the way, it's working. And when you look at Peru and Bolivia, it's astonishing in terms of just drug production what we've done. I've been watching Peru and Bolivia since literally I was 25 years old. The drugs are disappearing in Peru. It's unbelievable. It's down by 65% in 4 years. It's gone from the Huallaga Valley and the Apurimac Valley. It's now up in the mountains and the more hidden. Bolivia is unbelievable to me. I never thought for 7 years we poured money in there and drug production steadily inched up. Now we got Bolivian political leadership and Peruvian political leadership. They're turning us around. Drug production in Bolivia is down by more than 55% in 3 years. That's this brilliant young man, Vice President Quiroga, a lot of technocrats in office. They're still struggling with corruption, violence, but essentially, if you fly over the Chapare Valley, the drugs are gone. They're still up in the Yungas, they're up in the National Forest, and they've done it pretty well, too. By and large, the violence between the cocoleros and the various factions, farmers, has been managed pretty effectively. One of the reasons the Bolivians pulled it off, as well as the Peruvians, is they started to talk about what is drugs doing to us. You know, you want to see suffering. There's more suffering because of cocaine abuse in Rio than in Miami, in Caracas than in Detroit. And the Bolivians finally said, wait, God, look what this is doing to us in Cochabamba and Santa Cruz and places like that. Our children are using drugs. You know, the last president of Costa Rica is a friend of mine, and he told me to stop using this example. You know, when I took Latin American Studies 401, we study Uruguay and Costa Rica as the Switzerland of South Americans. Costa Rica, 3 million nice, happy people, homogeneous society, great place to retire as a gringo. They got 110,000 cocaine addicts. Probably 80–90% of them to crack cocaine. Violence, and it's just a minor drug smuggling right on the route to the United States. But these drugs have no value. They don't actually have any inherent value. You can give them away. You can sell cocaine to me for $250 a day. You can sell it as bazuco and smoke it for $2 a day. Then I'll get chronically addicted, and then I'll start sticking up my mama. Colombia is in agony, and this is a spectacular country. 40 million people, hardworking, honest. They grow coffee and flowers and do intellectual property development and light manufacturing, and they're a historical ally. And oh, by the way, this isn't flipping North Korea. These people are 3 hours flight from Miami, and they're a democracy. They elected a president and a legislature. And they've got this terrible problem. A lot of it's driven by drugs. They're now the #1 producer in the world of cocaine, 520 metric tons. And, you know, don't think about 12 pot plants out in the, you know, around the edge of the barn. When you fly into Tres Esquinas Combat Base in the south, basically there's been no government presence down in the south in their history, 20% of the land area of the province of Putumayo is under coca cultivation. Look out the plain, far as the eye can see, it's patches of coca. That's producing hundreds of millions of bucks, which is corrosively grinding away security and democracy in Colombia. And by the way, their kids are using heroin and cocaine. We said we ought to stand with these people. I went to the president a year ago and said, sir, you know, it's sliding in the wrong direction. These are admirable people. There's 1 million internal refugees. There's 500,000 have fled the country. 40% of the land area is no longer under government control. There's 26,000 people, narco-insurgents, the right-wing AUC, the FARC, the ELN. They're murderous people. They've got no political standing in that society. None at all. You know, Catholic Church, Gallup poll, 75%. You know, Chief of the Colombian Police, 73%. The Army, 68%. President Pastrana, 30%. The AUC, paramilitary, 9%. The FARC and ELN, 4%. They have no ability to win at the ballot box. And, you know, so we came up with a pretty coherent plan. It's $1.3 billion. Colombia has a 3-year, $7.5 billion plan. Our plan, $1.3 billion, a bunch of it goes to Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela, Ecuador, the Caribbean countries, the U.S. Coast Guard, the FOLs. If you look at the Colombia itself, about $220 million of it is actually alternative economic development. It's support for the judicial system development. There's $12 million in there for human rights security enhancement. It's a pretty balanced plan. It was put together by people like Tom Pickering and I, and the U.S. ambassador to Colombia. We're well-meaning and thoughtful people. My daughter's a captain in the United States Army. You know, my son is an infantry major in the United States Army. We have no intention of getting involved in Colombia in a warfighting role. But it was my view, we ought to have the regional actors ought to stand with the Colombians and not let them get isolated. That's what we're trying to do. I pray it works. It's a dangerous situation for these poor people. Thanks for that comment. I share your anxiety, you know.
Okay, I think we probably got time for a couple more questions. Would you like to ask the next one?
Sure. I guess I have a personal stake in this, as my best friend died of a heroin overdose last year, and he was part of that cohort that seemed to be ignored, I guess, from, as the first questioner said, as he was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate from Yale. My question is, why isn't the Office of, I guess, Drug Control not actively pushing needle exchange programs, since the studies show that they lower disease, but they're not increasing people using heroin or intravenous drugs more?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you where we are. And by the way, my background is essentially I'm an engineer and an organizer. People, dollars, machinery, read the study, find the policy. There are some aspects of dealing with chronic addiction that we're sure work. Methadone and LAM maintenance programs, when part of a broader treatment package, dramatically reduce heroin drug-taking behavior and crime and get people back to work, et cetera. needle exchanges are one aspect of a drug treatment methodology that suggests if you do this, you can use it as an access point to pull people into treatment. So where Secretary Shalala and I and the AIDS czar, as an example, Sandy Thurman, all agree is that drug treatment works, and you ought to organize it and pay for it and sustain it. We also all agree that there is no safe way to inject heroin or cocaine or methamphetamines or other drugs. The death rate from injecting drug use behavior is astronomical. We also agree, and the science tends to support, that there is absolutely no sense in ever trying to treat heroin addiction with heroin unless you don't give a rip about the people involved. If you don't give a rip about them, if it's not your son or daughter, say, hey, let them kill themselves on your own, then harm reduction, coherent harm reduction would say, why don't we provide injecting drug use places and free heroin, and we've seen experimentations of that in Switzerland and in the Netherlands. I'm sure it doesn't work, studies don't support it, but at least it's a coherent policy. Now, how about needle exchange? Let me tell you what our policy is, which I firmly support. Our stated policy is that the science supports needle exchange as being one aspect of attracting people into drug treatment. And so if community leadership wants to do needle exchanges, that we are supportive of that. And there's a bunch of ways to go about it. A cheap, easy way is just say you can buy needles for any reason, not just with a certificate to your insulin diabetic. And immediately, a needle costs a dime or so. Needles are not, money is not the problem with needle exchanges. I'm using $200 to $400 a day of heroin. I'm stealing, an amount commensurate to make that. The last problem I got is not having 20 cents for a needle. So if you really believe in it, Madam Mayor, get your health director, your police chief, start a needle exchange program. By the way, it's really cheap. You don't have to buy a couple of young college kids, drive around in a van, pass out 20-cent needles, give them condoms, a cup of hot coffee, a comic book about safe drug use, and drive away. It's a lot easier than trying to do drug treatment, which takes a lot of energy and wisdom. And so that's where we are. We say we support it. We're just not going to use federal funds. Now, let me also suggest to you that unlike most government officers, and unlike any of you, I actually read the studies for and against needle exchanges. And I think there's room for argument, which is why I felt comfortable in supporting the final federal policy, which is supportive of community-based needle exchanges. There's more than 100 in the country. But as I read the data, I think it's a crock. I sent my deputy director up to Vancouver. He's a noted drug research guy at the time, Dr. Hoover Adger. I sent two high IQ little weasels with him. I said, go up there for a week and try and figure out what's going on. And you know what's going on? You talk to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the city cops, the drug treatment. First of all, it starts unraveling drug treatment programs. That's exactly what it does. Secondly, you end up with the nutball effect, according to the Vancouver police. You start off with a needle exchange in this building, and then suddenly you tell the cops, you better back off this area. And then you have isolated chronic addicts who were emerging to find drugs and retreating into anonymity and self-destruction. Suddenly they're out in a free fire zone. And then it starts spreading, and then addicts cluster in, and then you pass out more needles. And you end up discovering in 2 Montreal and Vancouver studies that HIV rates among those involved in the needle exchange program was higher than among those not in the needle exchange program. The authors of the Montreal study were outraged when we put out that provocative assertion, but it was their numbers we were using. And by the way, in the Vancouver study, they said, well, look, stupid, we're just not giving out enough needles. We're up to, I think it was 2 million a year, maybe we need 10 million a year. I have concluded that it is, in my view, we are remiss from, as a social policy, to endorse treatment programs that leave people in misery. So personally, I don't support the needle exchange programs. I support active outreach for drug treatment. I support the drug court system. I support the, having parity for mental health problems and drug treatment. But on the other hand, we are supportive of communities. Now, the other thing, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor, when you decide you want a needle exchange program or a methadone clinic, for that matter, which I am supporting, I want to make sure that you understand that this isn't a black problem, a poor person's problem, and I don't want you to put the needle exchange program in the central city where working men and women, LPN truck drivers, police officers are trying to raise families, a lot of them single mothers. I want you to put the needle exchange program where I live in Old Town Alexandria. Because I want us all to understand that this is a problem that affects all of us. And we ought to be willing to share the burden of dealing with a chronic addict. So I am concerned that I don't see that kind of political leadership at community level. What I actually think was going on was that there's a huge drug legalization, harm reduction political force at work here, and they wanted the federal government to provide legitimacy to this effort. They ain't going to get it. Not from me. I think it's a nonsensical way to go about it. But if the mayor wants to do it, have at it. And a year later, I hope the mayor goes down to the needle exchange program, brings along TV cameras, and explains to the reporters why we're a lot better off here because of this needle exchange program. I don't think it pays off.
Okay, this will be the last question I'd like you to ask.
Good evening, General. I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School, and first of all, I think you'll be pleased to know that in our first-year class in crafting public policy here at the Kennedy School, our first assignment was to analyze your national drug control policy. So you should know that we're learning a lot here from your many successes and the very odd failure. But on to my question. Although you sound a lot more amenable to needle exchanges now, when President Clinton came out against federal funding for needle exchanges in April of '98, most people attributed his decision to your vocal opposition to needle exchanges, and in particular to a conversation that you and the President had while on Air Force One on the way to South America. Now, I and my classmates who are giggling over here were actually wondering what it was that you said to the President to help him change his mind, and if, given the political fallout that accompanied that advice, you would go back and do anything differently now.
Well, generally speaking, there's a rule that I never say what written or spoken advice I give the President, and I never repeat what he says, but I'm going to make an exception for you all.
Thank you.
And, it's sort of an interesting event. When the law was rewritten in '98, one of the things that we put in there solidly that I'm a nonpartisan officer of government. I am forbidden by law to take part in electoral politics, period. And I wanted it that way. I wanted to pose this as a national health, medical security issue. I was not a volunteer for this job. When they asked me to do it, they did it because the thing was a total collapse failure, bipartisan opposition even funding the office. It was a political vulnerability. It was 8 months to the election. Clinton was going to lose. There were two reasons why I ended up in that job. One, I would accept the job. And two, I was confirmable by the Senate, which is quite a statement in the Washington environment right now. And by the way, the actual reason I took it is my dad told me to. He said, if you think you can help on the issue, get out of the Army and give it a shot. So I've been quite happy to do it. Now, a quick statement about President Clinton. Again, I'm a non-political officer of government. In fact, throughout this experience, a bunch of people have helped me politically, both parties in Congress, Orrin Hatch, Joe Biden, Steny Hoyer, Elijah Cummings, Jim Colby. I've had a bunch of tutors over there. They actually know what they're talking about. They're beautiful people. And a lot of people in the administration have been partners from the start. Donna Shalala, one of the finest human beings I've ever worked with in my life. But there's others, Alan Leshner, Louis Freeh, Donnie Marshall, just some superb people. The biggest supporter I've had in this job from the start was President Clinton. absolutely. He stood with me. I got money out of him. I got support. He took decisions that were politically unattractive. This is a lousy political issue. That's why the candidates for the last 3 presidential elections have stayed away from it. It's a crummy political issue. What they're all reasonably comfortable with is they actually think this works. They think this is going to pay off, and they're hearing that from cops and educators and docs in their states. So I would just tell you unequivocally that President Clinton at close range has been supportive. He does his homework, which is unusual for a lot of people in Washington. You send him fat briefing books, he digests it, he understands what he's talking about, he's got a kind heart. He's a great dad, and therefore he's worried about adolescent behavior. That issue was tough politically. He should have politically, in my view, supported needle exchange with federal funding. Money was never the issue. None of us cared about the money. It's peanuts. I explained both sides of the issue to him. On the plane coming back from wherever we were going, Buenos Aires, and I told him, here's my view. And I said, sir, whatever you decide, I will absolutely support publicly or privately. And so from then on, the political calculus, the intellectual calculus that went into his decision was his own. I think personally he made the, I was running around saying I'm the only person in America that's happy with the decision, because the actual decision, back to her question, was we did support community-based needle exchanges. But we said federal dollars we're going to try and pump into treatment prevention, local law enforcement. Oh, by the way, in my view, had we made the wrong decision, we would have started unraveling the consensus that I had patiently built to build huge increases in funding for prevention and treatment. I think that would have been the political reaction of some of the conservative Republicans who were vehemently opposed to it on a variety of grounds that you got to respect, I think they would have been possibly some political mischief in it too. But bottom line is, I think the president made the right call. There's been other tough decisions. I've had one of the people I had supper with is working the medical pot issue. I'm amazed nobody's talked about medical pot. There's a lot of things I'm not sure of, and some things I know a lot about. I know a lot about hospitals and pain management. And that was another issue that a lot of you've got a situation in California right now, it's fascinating. A Republican candidate for Senate who's strongly advocating not only medical marijuana, but really a liberalization of medical use laws against Dianne Feinstein, who is adamantly holding the line. And she's a woman, I think, of tremendous political courage. When Proposition 200 went down, she was the only public figure who would stand with me. And basically, medical pot's another easy one from our perspective. If it's medical, it's not my business. It's NIH, FDA. That's who should be doing it. But you got to tell me with a straight face, brother, that you're talking as a doctor or a scientist when you want smoked pot, a bong stuck in your face for pain management for prostate cancer and Mass General. It isn't there. And I think what is there is, we ended up with a pretty good policy where we told NIDA, let's start investing in cannabinoid-based research. We're for it. THC is in a hospital pharmacy right now. Your doc can write a prescription. You can stick the pill in your face. You'll get stoned. It isn't very effective, and if you're an older guy or woman, you probably don't want to get stoned. You want to manage your problem. By the way, don't take it for glaucoma. You're in trouble, because the ophthalmologist will give you a bunch of drugs that will work for glaucoma, and one of them ain't going to be smoked pot, unless you just want to be a little bit stoned as you go blind. And on that somewhat non-serious note, thank you very much for the opportunity to share these ideas with you.
Well, Barry, on behalf of the Kennedy School and the IOP, thanks very much for joining us. And I'm sure that if anybody has a numbers question that they'd like to take up with General McCaffrey, he'll be glad to talk to you about it later. Good night.